Good morning. So this morning I actually had a request to speak on generosity. So the good news is that I seem to come back to this topic every once in a while. And the nice thing is that we've had enough new faces here that some of you haven't heard my stories. So. But stories have to be told. And actually, every Christmas we hang out with my father. Go into this long story, and he'll always say, "Stop me if you heard this one." Of course, we've all heard it 100 times. We never stop it. So stop me if you've heard this one. So generosity. In Buddhism, there's this concept of dana, and think of it as wholehearted giving. Giving in a sense where you're really getting yourself out of the way. No giver, no receiver, just that act of generosity, of charity, of giving. And in Japan, there's an interesting tradition with the monks, and they'll wear these hats, kesa, I think they call them, these long kind of conical hats, and they come down over the eyes, and they'll sit there with these big hats, and you can't see their faces really, but they've got their begging bowl. And the idea is the monk is really trying to take themselves out of the picture. It's just giving each passerby the opportunity to give. Right? Not looking for a thank you, not looking for anything, just giving each person that passes by that opportunity to give. So dana, no giver, no receiver, just giving. And this is one of the 6 paramitas, right? The perfections. So just to go through them, right? Generosity, discipline, patience or acceptance, joyful endeavor, samadhi, meditative concentration, or 6, prajna, wisdom or awareness. And I always seem to get stuck on first one. I never give many talks on the other paramitas, so there's something about my karma there, I suppose. Here I am with generosity. So the story that I want to build this around was a person that I met, Carl. And for a long time before I went to work, I'd go off to this coffee shop in the morning, go get coffee. And for the longest time, I would see this homeless person off on the side, clearly looking for money, right? Clearly, living in the streets. And most often you'd go by. But one day I decided to kind of reach out and talk to him. So I passed him by and I kind of engaged with him a little bit. And because I wanted to find out a little bit more about him. And he told me that he'd lost his job. He was living on the street, and was asked me for money. And I was at that point in my life where I was actually trying to cultivate generosity. It was a big part of my practice. Maybe really 10 years ago is about when this happened. And my practice, right or wrong, was if someone asked me for money, I would reach into my wallet and grab the first thing I had and give it to them, no matter what it was. Could be a 1, could be a 20. Usually I didn't carry anything bigger than 20. But whatever it was, I would just give. And it was really about, was I willing to be generous, to give without thought, just to give. And so that was my practice. And so this time when Carl found me, he asked for money, and I gave him that 20, and then off we went. And that encounter kind of stuck with me because I wanted to find some way to help Carl. We did get to talk a little bit, and I did. He told me about his situation. I can't say that we got to know each other. It's really hard to get to know each other in such a short time. But we would talk. So I'll call him Monk Carl. He's the one that's going to teach me this time. So I guess I have a lot of examples in my life. I've been thinking about this. Why is generosity, or why is this a practice of mine, or why do I focus on this? And I think about it. There's several people in my life that are just really generous people. My wife, for example, I've seen her go out of her way to chase down people and give a homeless person money, or go buy them lunch, stop traffic, and give them lunch. Sometimes I'm doing this, right? But she's so generous, right? That's what she does. Or my favorite example is my dad. Remember how they used to have these fake lottery tickets that you could give people? Well, someone bought a fake lottery ticket and gave it to my dad for a Christmas present. He opens up the present and he scratches it off and saw that he won this, I don't know, it's like $1 million. And his reaction was, here, you need this. And he tried to give it back, which ruined the joke. But this was the example that I grew up with, right? Somebody who really put himself second in a lot of ways. And so this was the example I grew up with. And so, exhibiting those paramitas, right? Generosity, discipline, joyful endeavor, patience. That's a tough one. I'm not sure if everyone I know has patience, but maybe that's the next practice after I've mastered generosity. We'll work on patience. So I think about these stories. It reminded me how important it is to surround ourselves with people that exude the qualities that we admire or aspire to, how important that is. So how important are groups like this, or our families? So here I'm with Carl, right? He's living in the woods since his divorce. It tells me he feels terrible for begging, but he has no money for food, hasn't been able to find a job. And I give him money, right? And while we're there, I really spend time looking him in the eye, because I feel like the homeless in particular feel invisible. In some ways, that can be an act of generosity, right? Just really giving somebody your time, right? Really spending it with them, getting yourself out of the way and really engaging that person and see, where are they? What do they need? What can I offer? But in a more responsive, listening, feeling, giving way. And so I was doing that with Carl. And when we left, I really wanted to find some way to help him. So I actually spent a fair amount of time researching it, trying to find some way to give him some help. And it's interesting because it depends. There's some good programs for certain groups, like mothers, children's, vets. But if you don't fall in one of those categories, there aren't a lot of programs. There's some, but they're really hard to get into. And so that's what I was trying to do for Carl, is try to find some options. See if I can get Monk Carl off the street. And I should say, though, stepping back a little bit, that this topic always seems to be one of my more controversial topics. And probably because I speak about the homeless and giving to the homeless. And I do want to say that, many consider it unethical or maybe unhelpful to actually give money to the homeless. And I really don't want to derail us with this, because for me, this talk is not about that. It's more, can we cultivate that mindset of generosity? Whatever right action, whatever that moment, whatever is needed in that moment. So can we cultivate that? And I think nowadays I'm a little less likely to just give money, for a lot of the reasons that people bring up, right? That there are programs that are better, more effective way to help people. So I'm less likely now. But at that time, I needed to give. I needed that practice. That was what I was cultivating. Of course, Carl wasn't going to make this easy. We'll see in a little bit. That's why I'll call him Monk Carl. He's my teacher here. So we give, right? We give. So a day or two later, I run into Carl again, and he didn't recognize me at first, but eventually he did. He didn't remember my name, but I didn't really expect him to. So of course, Carl immediately asked for money. Um, and I decided not to here because I didn't want this codependent relationship where I was just handing him money, right? That really wasn't what I was trying to do here. So I told Carl that I wanted to help him get off the street, that I really hated to see him living in the woods. And so Monk Carl at this point said, as I kind of gently pressed him, um, he basically told me, he looked me in the eye and said, well, he's not really living in the woods, he's just trying to make rent. So now it's interesting, right? Because you don't really know what the truth is. Now, clearly, this is somebody who's having difficulties, right? Somebody that needs. Um, was he telling the truth then? Was he telling the truth now? Was he lying then? Was he lying now? What is the situation? It's like think back to all the situations in my life. I don't know what real is. I just know that I'm here, right? And that so there I was with Carl, and he told me that, well, I lied to you last time. I'm just trying to make rent. Okay, so now the practice really begins. What is dana? What is generosity now? And reflecting on this, I think this is a reason why a lot of people shy away from giving, because after a while, it's easy to feel burned, right? Or to be frustrated, or to be tired, right? Fatigue, I think, can settle in, and kind of reflecting on that, it really came back to, all right, well, what part of me is frustrated? What part of me is tired? What part of me is wanting to pull away from other people? And it really occurred to me that one of the reasons I really focused on this is it put me on the edge of my practice. At that time, that was my edge. I have new edges that I explore now, but at that time, that was the edge of my practice. And for me, that's really critical for this path, is that each and every one of you needs to find what's that edge, what's that boundary, where am I just not as comfortable? Because that's fertile ground for practice. Right? Perfection of giving, dana. Dana transcends ego. Right? This is giving beyond giving. It's transcending the ego. So how do I get my ego out of the way and work with Carl? So I decided at the time I'm going to work with Carl. Right? So what does it mean to be generous when it's difficult? What does it mean to give when you're unsure? Right? How do you practice? Right? What is right action? There's no good answer. Now what? What is it? So a few days later, I run into Carl again, and I think it's about a week later, and he recognized me a little more quickly this time, because I was probably one of the few people that actually spoke with him. And of course, he immediately asked for money. But I instead of giving him money, we talked, right? And I talked about how I wanted to get him help. I wanted to help him get out, and I talked about how he changed his story on me. And it was interesting because he was taken aback, and he actually started to choke up a little bit. He just said, "I'm not a bad guy." He had been caught, right, in that little lie, and we talked for a little while. I expressed some more interest in helping him, but it just didn't work out. So we parted ways. But so that little act of engaging, right, engaging with Carl, I really saw myself. I saw each of us, right? Because I think it's easy to find someone like Carl. Right? We all have our Carls. I am Carl. But it's easy to get in the trap of judging that situation, judging Carl, judging yourself, judging others. But how many of us are like this? How many of us are stuck in this endless cycle of unhealthy behaviors or unhealthy decisions? Actually, we all are. It's just a matter of degree, I think. We're all this way. Whether it's choices we make about our health, our relationships, our emotional well-being, our physical health, spiritual well-being, substance abuse. So how many of us make bad decisions? Sometimes even knowing that it will lead to problems, but we do. We develop these habitual patterns and we do it anyway. How many of us have been in situations where we want the suffering to stop, but either don't know how to bring about the changes, or in some ways, part of us is reveling, right, in that consistency, right? This is my pattern. I'm comfortable. And so we stay kind of in the suffering. So how many of us are like Carl, right? I am Carl. We are Carl. So I thought about that quite a bit as I was reflecting on the paramitas, these perfections, and these are called perfections because you never really get there. You think of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, right? This is the Bodhisattva of compassion, and there's different images of him or her. It depends on which culture you talk about. But the Indian version, 100 arms and hundreds of heads and all these eyes, because all of these arms to reach out and help the world, right? Ultimate compassion. And I love that imagery because if you think of Carl or any other situation, sometimes it feels like we need those 100 arms, right? And so this is a perfection. Dana, generosity like this, is a perfection that we strive for. It's a path that we're on. And no, you never get there. But the path, right? The journey. It's why we're here together. We encourage each other, right? We look for that edge. What is your edge? What is the boundary of your practice? What is next for you, right? Where do you find your Carl? What is your Carl? Where is your Dave? Maybe I need help today. So I'll leave you with that. And maybe we'll open it up for a discussion, right? What is your edge? What does generosity mean for you? Have you had fatigue, whether it's generosity or some other aspect of your practice? Fatigue, anger, frustration. How do you work with this? What does that mean from a practice perspective? So I think I'll leave you with more questions than answers today. All right. Thank you.